Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Hey there, good morning. Good morning. So today, I want to talk about some things that I have found over the years that interfere with play therapists being able to get good results in play therapy with their child and adolescent clients, especially when working with children who have experienced trauma. So I don't know how many of you have ever said, oh yeah, I just love providing mediocre play therapy services. Yeah. In my 30 years in mental health, I have never heard anybody say that. And typically mental health professionals, like your whole reason for getting into the mental health field is because you want to make a difference. You want to do a good job. You want to witness the amazing transformation of your clients. And that's what drives us. That's what keeps us in the play therapy field of child and adolescent mental health professionals. That's what keeps us in the field. So, and then what tends to happen is, this happens to all of us, happened to me, still happens to me sometimes, if I'm being completely honest, even 30 years in and 15 years of experience supervising others, doing consultation. I think this happens to all of us. And it tends to boil down to one of the four mistakes that I want to talk about today. And these mistakes can happen pretty much regardless of the presenting issue. I do see them happen with therapists who are working with children and adolescents who have experienced trauma. So let's get started for today. If you're joining me live, I would love to see who's here. Go ahead and post your name in the comments, where you're from, what population you work with. So I'm Cathi Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and registered play therapist supervisor here in the United States. I've been in the child and adolescent mental health field for about 30 years now, of which 20 have been specifically using play therapy and expressive arts. I got into the mental health field back in 1992. It was, actually 1990, if I count graduate school. And it was really hard to find back then. It was really before the internet. So it was a lot harder to find play therapy training. I had been introduced to play therapy as a special education teacher back in the late 1980s. So I knew what it was. I knew how powerful it was. It just took me a while to find it. So to me, that's one of the things that kind of drives me as a professional, is making sure people know how to get good play therapy training, supervision, and consultation, so that you can also make that impact that you want to make, helping children, adolescents, and families heal. And so that's why I do what I do. So let's get started. So the first mistake that I find that play therapists make, and I've talked about this previously in previous live streams. So if you're interested in this topic for number one, which is also related to mistake number two, which I'll go over, has to do with case conceptualization and the connection between clinical case conceptualization and our treatment planning. So treatment planning is the process that we get to before we actually write that treatment plan. These two are very closely linked. And two of the biggest mistakes that I find people making are not doing these first two. So if you're interested in this topic, you can pop over to my YouTube channel, Renewing Hearts, Cathi Spooner. And if you click on the live tab, you'll see all the replays of the live stream broadcasts that I've done in the past. If you're in my Facebook group, then you can look in the featured section. After the broadcast ends, I pin all of the replays to the featured section. On Instagram, because I have to live stream simultaneous, I can't use StreamYard in there. You can probably find them in my grid. It's probably easiest, though, to pop over to my YouTube channel and just find them all there. So this idea of case conceptualization, what does that mean? It basically means that you have taken that first session, and if the kids are young, I usually just have parents come. If they're a little older, like 10, 11, 12, adolescents, I'll usually ask parents how they feel about their child being present for that first session, because we are going to be doing a lot of information gathering, and I want to find out how parents feel about or how they think their child will do in a very long session, talking about all the specifics of what's going on, plus family history, developmental history, all of those things. So sometimes the child is present and sometimes the child is not present. The reality is, in that first session, the better you get at gathering the information, then that's going to help you throughout the change process. We're always gathering more. Of course, you can't gather everything at that first session. I always say that first 90 days gives you a really good sense of the information you've collected and what that looks like for your specific clients, like the ones sitting in front of you. You're getting to know them a little bit better. And throughout the process, I feel like we're always in assessment mode, using that information to see how it relates to what's going on. We're assessing progress. We're assessing any obstacles, what's contributing to those obstacles. So we're doing that throughout the process. And it's really important to use that dedicated time at the beginning of the therapy process to gather as much information as you can, because that's going to give you a good sense of what's going on with your client and why is it going on. For example, you want to gather information about what's going on with your client, the specifics of the information. You want to gather family history, especially with trauma. Is there a family history of trauma? What's the parents' history of trauma? What you want to find out about attachment relationships, and if there's trauma or neglect, what did that look like, so to speak? How did parents respond? What kind of trauma was it? How long did it happen? Over what period of time? That's going to give you some really good information about what's going on with your client and parents' capacity to help their child through that process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the thing is, that's really what helps you get a sense of where there might be potential triggers, what activates the information, what activates that trauma. How do parents respond when their child gets activated? Because here's the thing. If you've worked with kids who have experienced trauma, then what you will have observed is that it traumatizes the family. Now, it may, depending on the type of trauma, depending on who maybe perpetrated the trauma, if it was abuse, because we know trauma can be medical trauma, can be car accident, can be a lot of different kinds of trauma, bullying trauma. So it can be a lot of different kinds of trauma. If it's more abuse or neglect, then you're definitely looking at the attachment relationships. But when those things happen in the family, it kind of sends a ripple effect through the system. And so you're kind of looking at how everyone responded, how what's being done to address the trauma, how is that going? All of those things, you can gather that at the beginning of the play, that very first session. And then whatever your play therapy theoretical model is going to influence how you make sense of what's going on. And then that play therapy model helps you explain what's going on. It also helps you understand who needs to be involved in the play therapy process. So, for example, I like using a neuroscience and attachment theoretical lens when I'm working with children who are like 8 and older. If they're like children like 8-ish, 7 and younger, I definitely am going to use a child-centered play therapy model because that's what I was trained in. I see how it works. That's going to influence how I understand what the problem is and what I'm going to do in the sessions and what that looks like in each stage of the process. When I'm using a neuroscience and attachment lens, I like using that one because it really takes in that mind-body approach. And the trauma model that I was trained in a long time ago really looked at that mind-body approach and the sensory aspects of the sensory aspects of trauma, so that when you're planning your play therapy process and you're looking at what needs to happen in each stage of the change process, you're using your theoretical lens to guide you and help you understand what you need to do in each stage. And so when I use a neuroscience and attachment lens, then that first and foremost helps me understand what's going on and why it's happening. And then I can use that to understand here's the stages of the change process that need to happen. And then when I'm planning my interventions and using play therapy and figuring out what needs to happen, then that's going to guide the process that I am going to go through. It also influences how I integrate parents into the play therapy process, because if I'm using a neuroscience and attachment lens, then I know I need to somehow include parents or caregivers, guardians in that change process as the therapeutic agents of change. And so that's the first and foremost. That's one of the biggest mistakes that I find, is really not fully understanding how trauma impacts children and adolescents. And you need your theoretical model to help understand that, but you also need to make sure you've gathered a thorough history in the beginning, so it kind of gets you started with that case conceptualization process. The second mistake that I find happens a lot, and so one of the things that I do, so I have this program. It's an online program. It's called Play Therapy Academy. Steph is in my Play Therapy Academy program. And one of the things that we talk about all the time when we're staffing cases, because we'll do case presentations each group meeting, and then we'll go through that kind of, okay, conceptualizing what's going on, what's being used at this point in time, how is that going, how are parents integrated, and then what theoretical model are you using? And then that kind of helps figure out what needs to happen in the change process. And what I find happens when people don't do that assessment at the beginning, it's hard for them to really understand what model to use, as well as who to be involved as well. They tend to get lost more frequently in the process. And here's the thing, what ends up happening then is, because your play therapy model is like your GPS system that guides you all the way through each stage of change. Your play therapy model defines how you understand the problem and then what you're going to do about it. So if you're not necessarily using a theoretical model, then what ends up happening, and if you haven't done your assessment in the beginning, then what happens more often than not is then you kind of get lost and you start like getting a little panicky and you want to try different interventions. This will work or this will work. And then you get lost, and it's kind of like throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping some of the spaghetti sticks. And here's the thing, I still, 30 years later, I'll still sometimes get lost. But what I can do, because I have a play therapy model and I have a theoretical model, is I can take a step back, and I tell myself to kind of take a breath and take a step back, I go back to my case conceptualization. I think about my theoretical model and I think, okay, what's going on? All right, let me get reoriented. Let me reground myself. And then I'll think, okay, I know what's going on. I know what I need to do. And oh, yeah, I went off track here. So here's how I can get back on track. Here's what needs to happen. I get reoriented, and then I can then help get my clients back on track because I have a framework that I'm navigating through. So what happens is when you don't have that intentional plan because it's not grounded in a theoretical model, then you kind of get off track and a little bit lost in the process. So that's the third. Oh, let me see. There's a comment here. Facebook user says, do you have any recommendations on trainings or books for attachment and neuroscience info? Well, that's a great question. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about at the end of this broadcast today, I do have, if you're interested, I have a live webinar coming up in September 16th here in the US. It's play therapy with traumatized children and teens. I like using a neuroscience and attachment lens with play therapy. And so one of the things that I think it's important to do in any of the trainings that I do is make sure we go through some of the theoretical components of trauma. We look at what research has to say, what we know about neuroscience and attachment. That kind of gives us that case conceptualization model. And then how do we use that through the stages of change? And what does that look like? What interventions can you use? What do you want to make sure you're looking for? I'll give a lot of play therapy activities. We'll do a lot of experientials, but also how you integrate parents in the process as well. So I have that training coming up. If you're interested, I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. As far as some books about attachment and neuroscience, there are a ton of them. Maybe what I'll do is, because you're in the Facebook group, maybe what I'll do is I'll put some of those in there later. And Steph, I think this is you. In the Play Therapy Academy, if you go into your Play Therapy Academy account, there's a book, there's a list, a Google document for recommended books. So one of the things that we do in Play Therapy Academy is people can put, if there's any book recommendations, we can put them in there. Although I don't think we've done that recently, but there are books in there. So you may want to look in there. All righty. So number third mistake that I often find people make. This one I find happens on and off. The first two are the ones that I find happen more often. The third one does happen though, and I honestly have to remind myself of this one as well, is really not balancing that therapeutic rapport with a theoretical model. So this one's really related to number 2 as well. Because, and number 1, the balance is we want to make sure that we have that therapeutic rapport, because that therapeutic rapport is what grounds that change process in safety. And we know that children, we know adults, none of us are going to really, when we're not feeling safe, we're in threat mode and we're not really engaging in the change process at that moment in time. And for children, we know that in order for them to access those therapeutic powers of play, to engage in the play process, they really have to have those threat circuits deactivated so that their social engagement circuits can be activated. And social engagement circuits have to be activated in order for them to engage in the change process. And so first and foremost, the first task is always create safety, and you're maintaining and monitoring that therapeutic rapport throughout the change process. The thing is, though, if you have therapeutic rapport, but you don't have a theoretical model, you're not grounding your approach in a theoretical model, then what often happens is you're more prone to getting lost in the process. You're more prone to doing the spaghetti against the wall and hoping something sticks approach, which isn't the most effective. And sometimes that has a tendency to derail the change process at worst, make it take a little longer than maybe it needs to. I find that we sometimes lose clients. They may drop out at that point in time because we don't have that balance of therapeutic rapport, that safety, along with that theoretical model that's going to determine what we do in each stage of the change process, what stage of the change process we're in, and that theoretical model, even an integrated approach like prescriptive play therapy is an integrated approach. Ecosystemic play therapy is an integrated approach. Even when you're using an integrated approach, which most of us do, myself included, even then, the thing is, the integrated model means you're using theoretical models of, you're kind of combining them in your toolbox, so to speak, but each of those will have a foundation of a theoretical approach. So even when you're using a specific model in your toolbox, it's still grounded in theory. So you want to make sure that you're using the intervention based on that theory. And with an integrated approach, then you're going to access those therapeutic powers of play differently based on whatever approach you're using. And you're looking at how that model accesses those therapeutic powers of play, because that's what makes play therapy different from other expressive arts modalities. How you access those therapeutic powers of play is what makes play therapy different. And so getting good results and being effective and being able to make that difference for your clients is really about that balance between your therapeutic rapport, creating that sense of safety and connection, as well as your theoretical model. That's what I call the secret sauce, so to speak, is when you have a good balance with those. And we know with balance, sometimes it'll maybe need to use a little more therapeutic rapport and less model because you need to really strengthen that relationship. And then when that's pretty strong in a good place, and you can probably look at more of the change process and what's going on with that, what interventions you need to use, their theoretical model in that regard. So those are, to me, that's like the secret sauce, is having that balance between creating that therapeutic rapport and using your theoretical model to guide you through the process. And then the fourth mistake, this one I find comes up a lot. If you've listened to any of my broadcasts in the past, you'll have heard me say this probably. Well, you will have heard me say several things. One, case conceptualization informs your treatment planning. That's your treat. And those are, and your theoretical model is like your GPS system through the change process. You will have also heard me say that parents are the therapeutic agents of change, and how play therapists engage parents, caregivers, guardians in the change part is critical for getting that long-term success. And when you're talking about children who have experienced trauma, then one of the things that is really important to do is to, when you're gathering that information at the very first session, that history taking to do your case conceptualization, you really need to make sure you're building rapport with parents and you have gathered information about trauma in parents, trauma intergenerationally, how that was addressed or not addressed, because you're assessing caregiver capacity to help their child navigate through all the stages of change when the trauma triggers get activated. If parents have a history of unresolved trauma, then the likelihood that attachment issues as well, then the likelihood that's going to get activated during the play therapy process, that's going to get activated and derail or make their parents much more ineffective to help their child, exponentially increases. So making sure you are building that rapport with parents, making sure you have an intentional plan of how parents are going to be involved in the change process, assessing caregiver capacity for that building secure attachment. Where do parents get triggered? We all get triggered. And can parents recognize that? Can they take a step back and get regulated so that they can help their child? What is their approach to parenting? How do they respond when their child's behavior is less than fabulous, can be a little scary? If parents are active, if their trauma and attachment issues got activated, then it's going to make them a little more, it's going to create more difficulty for parents to address the problem in the most effective way. So if you have built that therapeutic rapport with parents and you have an intentional plan where you're meeting with parents without the child present, maybe you're doing some parent-child sessions, maybe you're doing some family play therapy sessions, then you have that opportunity to get a sense of what's going on. And then that gives you information for how you can best support parents and help them to be those therapeutic agents of change for their clients, because parents are going to be in their child's life much longer than you will. That's the goal anyway, that they will have that connection with parents. Parents and child will have that strong relationship that children can use their parents to navigate the challenges of life. And so the only way that's going to happen, though, is if you have that intentional plan for how you're going to include parents in the change process. So that is it for today. I just want to do a little recap of what we talked about today. Mistake number one is not fully understanding how trauma has impacted the child and adolescent because you haven't done that history gathering at the very beginning and you haven't asked the questions that need to be asked about that. If you're interested in case conceptualization and using case conceptualization in play therapy, I do have an online course. It's self-paced, so you take it in your time zone. If you go over to my website at rhplaytherapytraining.com, go on the courses page, you'll see I have a few self-paced courses. One is Play Therapy Foundation, Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Foundations. Another one is Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Case Conceptualization. Another one is Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Treatment Planning. So if that's something where you feel like you could use a little extra support, you can hop over to my website and check out those courses. I'll talk a little bit more about Play Therapy Academy if you're looking for some more support of how do you take the information you're learning in trainings and applying those with your clients in real time. Then I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end as well. So the second mistake that I find happening is that play therapists, child and adolescent therapists end up kind of throwing together a variety of interventions without an intentional plan because you're not really grounding your treatment for helping clients who have experienced trauma. You're not really grounding that in a theoretical model. Even when you're using an integrated approach, there's theory underlying the approach, and that theory dictates how you're going to help your clients access those therapeutic powers of play. And that's what sets play therapy apart from other treatment modalities. And you definitely want to make sure that you've done that case conceptualization, which is going to influence your treatment planning. So case conceptualization is what's going on, what exactly is the problem, and why is the problem happening? So patterns and things like that. And then that influences your treatment planning. Your treatment planning is, okay, so I know what the problem is. I have a good idea. And I can see some of the patterns that might be perpetuating this problem. And so here's what needs to happen in order for that change to occur. So now what am I going to do about it? How am I going to help my client? And when you don't have that foundation of case conceptualization and theoretical model, then it can end up getting lost in the process. And then the third mistake is not balancing creating that therapeutic rapport that creates that sense of safety with your theoretical model and applying the theoretical model. And to me, this is a balancing throughout the change process. Sometimes you'll need a little more therapeutic rapport building, less change and intervention. Sometimes your clients are in a good enough place, or now is the time, and you have that strong relationship where you can do more challenging, you can do more interventions. But also your theoretical model is like your GPS that guides you through that change process. Otherwise, you're just kind of fumbling your way through the process and throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping something sticks, so to speak. And then the fourth mistake is not building rapport with parents or caregivers, not really understanding the pivotal role that parents play in that change process. And especially when it comes to play therapy and especially when it comes to trauma, is really assessing if there's any parental history of trauma, any generational history of trauma and attachment problems, because that's going to give you a better understanding of how you need to support parents, caregivers, or guardians, how you need to support them, and having an intentional plan. When are you going to meet with them? How often are you going to meet with them? What are you going to be doing in those sessions? Which is typically you're going to be doing some of that parenting skills training, helping them understand what's going on with their child, helping them understand what kind of parenting approach they need to use, specific things that they need to do. And all of that is going to require that you have that rapport with parents, that they trust you. So when you're asking them to do some hard things that are out of their comfort zone, then they will trust you enough to make those changes that you're recommending that they make. And without that strong therapeutic rapport with parents, they're not likely to follow through. They're not likely to trust you. They're more likely to hear you blaming them and shaming them, even though you're not. That's what's going to come up with them. And if you don't have that rapport with them, then it's going to be hard to recognize that. And oftentimes parents will just pull their kid from treatment. So building that rapport with parents helps to navigate through some of those difficult parts of the change process. So that is it for today. If you're interested in the training that's coming up on September 16th, it's a live webinar training, Play Therapy with Traumatized Children and Teens. I use a neurobiology and attachment lens. We go through and kind of look at trauma with that lens to better understand what's going on. Why is it happening? And then that helps to explain why you need to use the different kind of play therapy interventions, what stage of change that your client is in, what kind of play therapy interventions you need to do in each of those stages of change. We look at all of those things. We do a lot of experiential activities, a lot of group interaction so that you can get support from each other as well. That's one of the things I like about the live webinars or even in person is a lot of that exchange between professionals to get ideas and support from each other. It's kind of like an infusion of some energy and ideas and support. So that's always nice. The other thing, if you're interested in Play Therapy Academy, which is my online play therapy consultation program, we meet twice a month. We do case consultations. We take kind of that what you've learned in trainings and how to apply that with your clients. I'm kind of a teacher at heart anyway, so I always end up doing a little bit of teaching in our case consultations anyway. But the other thing is that you not only get my 30 years of experience in mental health, plus all my experience with children prior to that, you get the power of the group and their wisdom and knowledge and resources and ideas. And that to me is where the magic happens for Play Therapy Academy in those group consultation meetings. And then we also have their courses inside of the Play Therapy Academy. So all of the getting grounded in play therapy foundations, getting grounded in play therapy case conceptualization, and getting grounded in play therapy treatment planning. Those courses are actually included in Play Therapy Academy, plus some other bonuses and things like that. So if you're interested in Play Therapy Academy, you can pop over to my website at rhplaytherapytraining.com. Play Therapy Academy will be on the supervision page. You can schedule a free 30-minute video call with me to find out more about Play Therapy Academy. If you're interested in any of the trainings or the trauma training that I have coming up, you can hop over to the website, rhplaytherapytraining.com/courses, and I will see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.